Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing Double Rainbow by David Foster Wallace. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, 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 dee-doo-dee-doo-doo. So this was my second D.H. Lawrence book. For such an old-timey author, he is really good. I've read a number of books this year from that era, like turn of the 20th century, and they can be real yawns. It was just, a different time, a different way of writing. I remember, I think it was, I read somewhere that H.G. Wells said that The Old Maid's Tale was the best novel ever written. And what's funny about that is that may well have been true in 1905 or whatever. Maybe it was. But we've really come a long way in the last 120 years or whatever. That being said, Lawrence's work, Sons and Lovers, which I read earlier this year, was surprisingly good. It was really engaging. And there wasn't really a boring part in it, which was really cool. A lot of these classics, like, they have good parts, they have bad parts, but a lot of it is like... That's another thing that's changed, which I think I've talked about before. I think I talked about when I read The Secret Agent. They spend so much time setting stuff up that we just don't do anymore. Like, that's just stylistically something that novels don't do anymore. They drop you into the action, they hook you, and then gradually they let you know what's going on and, throughout the book. Old-timey novels, they felt like they had to set everything up and then proceed with the story. And then if you're lucky, the story's good. With The Rainbow, it was another Lawrence tale. Wasn't as good as Sons and Lovers. I'll say that up front. And it was closer to the kind of yawny... there's a word for you I just made up. Closer to the kind of, tiresome, like, draggy, like, everything has to be described in excruciating detail. And this thing with genealogies, like, some of these books, like, they don't feel like they're ready to start the book until they've told you 3 generations back where the main character came from. And this was another one of these books. It started out, I think the main character was, like, the granddaughter of the characters that they started with. Because they talked about this farmer, Brangwen, who married a Polish lady who was not an old maid, a widow. She was a widow, and Brangwen fell in love with her, married her, and then she had her kid, which was Ursula. And I'm not sure if the Ursula who ends up being the main character was the daughter or the granddaughter. I lost track. I'm not going to lie to you. It was exhausting. I've been reading this book for a couple of months now, like in little dribs and drabs. It's one of the bad things about the Kindle, by the way. I do read books on the Kindle while I'm reading other books, so those are much more like when I'm on the shitter, when I have a spare minute here or there. Anyway, I'm just jabbering on here. On to the book. The book got really good about, I don't know the page numbers because it was on the Kindle, but I'm going to say about 65% of the way in, 75% of the way in. What happens is that Ursula, the main character, decides she's going to set off from home and become a teacher, which at the time, I gather, was considered extremely a matter of ill repute. Like, she was the sort of class that shouldn't have to work. And she said, I want to be independent, I want to go work. So she goes off, she becomes a teacher, she becomes independent to some extent. And then there's a good chunk of this story, it's kind of the centerpiece of the story, talking about how she went in with the best of intentions, but the system of education at the time and just dealing with children broke her down. So she started off saying, I don't want to beat kids, I don't want to, act the way that my teachers did with me, and so on and so forth. Then gradually she gets into a situation where she has to cane a kid, and then after that she becomes part of the organization, and she acts like every other teacher does. And that part was really interesting. if the book had just been about that, and I also found in Of Human Bondage, the old-timey English education system stuff was intriguing. It was intriguing to hear what these kids thought of that system, where it was just like if you were bad, you got your ass beat. And it was like a Lord of the Flies almost, because everyone was against you. They didn't care if they could turn you in to keep from getting their ass beat, they would. But kids were just like nightmares, so maybe they kind of needed to have their ass beat until they became adults. It's intriguing. I mean, we don't do it anymore for good reason, so it's fascinating to read about. If The Rainbow had just been about that, it would have been really like top tier book. But unfortunately, like I said, there was this whole part in the beginning about her genealogy and the farm where she came from and blah, blah, blah. And then after the part in the school, there's this love story that feels almost tacked on with this, I guess he's a Polish count, where they discover what sex is, they embrace and they roll around in the hay, and it's, I'm sure for the time, like really titillating, but to the modern eye, is very like still kind of cloaked with that mystique of like he took her, you know, like I can't really recreate it like off the top of my head here, but it's cloaked in so much metaphor and stuff that you only vaguely get a sense that what's going on is they're having sex. Now you can tell, like I said, that it was really titillating for the time. And one of the interesting things about this book, and I think Sons and Lovers 2 was abridged. In this one, they had brackets, like the hard brackets, on the parts that were like really juicy and sexy, like where Lawrence actually said things like, "They made love under the tree." So these parts were in brackets, which I think I remember from Sons and Lovers, there were all the sexy bits that were considered, like too risque for 1905 had been excised, they said, but that copy that I read, the censored bits had been put back in. In this one, same deal. The stuff that was too risque was in brackets, so you knew. And I'm reading along, and I'm like, I remember that from Sons and Lovers. I remember them saying there were parts that were too risque that they cut that made it almost unreadable in the first, drafts of the first released published editions of Sons and Lovers. In the Rainbow, those parts were presumably also excised and then put back in brackets so you could see them. And like I said, it was real, like, modest to my modern eyes, but I can understand why, like he breathed heavily as he kissed her with his tongue, would have been excised at that time. So definitely a step down from Sons and Lovers. If you really liked Sons and Lovers, may as well stay on the train and read this book about the Brangwens. I just started Women in Love, which is the second book about the Brangwens. So I'll let you know how that turns out. Like I said, there's really only good 30% of the book that was like really engaging. But sadly, that's a step up from a lot of these classics that I've been reading, where some of them, like Point and Counterpoint, I just cannot get into them at all. But anyway, one man's humble opinion. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.